Comenzamos el bloque informativo en Extra News.
El representante Coomer dice: los miembros del comité del 6 de enero no dijeron la verdad. Los informes que indican que exmiembros del comité selecto de la Cámara de Representantes del 6 de enero están pidiendo indultos preventivos al presidente saliente Joe. Indican que tienen buenas razones para estar preocupados, dijo el día de hoy el presidente del Comité de Supervisión de la Cámara de Representantes, James Coomer, republicano por Kentucky. Coomer estuvo en un medio para discutir un informe del día martes que indica que el expresidente del 6 de enero, Benny Thompson, demócrata por Mississippi, se encuentra entre los principales miembros del panel que temen la rendición de cuentas por parte del presidente electo Donald Trump, quien ha estado hablando sobre la destrucción criminal de evidencia y la manipulación de testigos por parte de los miembros del comité. Bueno, parece que no fueron sinceros. Eso no debería sorprender a nadie, dijo Coomer. Todo lo que hace el representante demócrata Jaime Raskin siempre estará lleno de ficción. Y ya sabes, obviamente van a pedirle perdón a Joe. Si no sintieran que tienen algún tipo de culpa o responsabilidad, no irían a pedirle perdón a Joe. Ahora la especulación se centra en si Joe emitirá indultos antes de dejar el cargo el día lunes. Ya veremos qué hace Joe. Sabemos que ya ha abusado del proceso de indultos con su propia familia, dijo Coomer, refiriéndose a los indultos generales otorgados a su primer hijo Hunter por un periodo de 10 años. Creo que seguirá abusando del proceso de indulto durante los próximos 3 o 4 días, así que nada me sorprendería con respecto a lo que haría Joe, dijo Coomer a un medio. Pero ya saben, probablemente ahora le estén guiñando el ojo al presidente y diciéndole: intentamos eliminar a su no simpatizante, intentamos sacarlo de la boleta electoral, hicimos todo lo que nos pidieron y ahora él vendrá por nosotros. Tienen que ayudarnos, eso es probablemente lo que está pasando, agregó.
Suscríbete y da clic a la campanita para mantenerte bien informado.
El representante Singh dice: Burgum y los nominados de Trump son enormemente talentosos. Dos cosas quedarán claras en la audiencia de confirmación de Doug Burgum como secretario del Interior el día de hoy, incluyendo que la lista del presidente electo Donald Trump es enormemente talentosa, no hay duda, dijo el representante Ryan Singh, republicano de Montana. Y segundo, estaban muy bien preparados, dijo Singh. De hecho, en materia de políticas estaban mejor preparados que algunos de sus amigos demócratas del Senado. Por eso creo que ha sido un enorme éxito presentar a este grupo de candidatos y creo que todos ellos tendrán éxito. En lo que respecta a Doug Burgum, no puedo pensar en una mejor persona para el interior, añadió. Es del oeste, entiende los valores occidentales. Es un hombre de negocios, fue gobernador de Dakota del Norte. Entiende el agua, nuestro medio ambiente y la importancia de la energía. Se puede llegar a dominar el sector energético con bastante rapidez, pero va a requerir mucho trabajo. Burgum dijo a un panel del Senado que Estados Unidos puede aprovechar el desarrollo de combustibles fósiles y otras fuentes de energía para promover la paz mundial y reducir los costos, y expresó preocupaciones sobre la confiabilidad de las fuentes de energía renovables promovidas bajo la administración de Joe. También dijo que Estados Unidos necesita generar más electricidad de carga base a partir de carbón y otras fuentes, ya que busca abastecer los centros de datos de la industria tecnológica del país. Si se confirma su nombramiento, Burgum se convertiría en el administrador principal de tierras federales. Esto es algo fundamental para nuestra seguridad nacional, afirmó Burgum. Sin una base de operaciones, vamos a perder la carrera armamentística de la IA ante China. Hirono criticada por la pregunta perturbadora que le hizo a Burgum en la audiencia de confirmación. Esta señora tiene problemas. La senadora demócrata Massey Hirono de Hawái enfrentó burlas en redes sociales el día jueves por sus preguntas iniciales al candidato a secretario del Interior, Doug Burgum, durante una audiencia de confirmación. Como parte de mis responsabilidades de garantizar la idoneidad de los candidatos ante cualquiera de los comités en los que participo, hago las dos preguntas iniciales siguientes, dijo Hirono a Burgum el día jueves. La primera es, desde que usted se convirtió en adulto, ¿ha hecho alguna vez peticiones no deseadas de favores sexuales o ha cometido algún tipo de acoso o agresión verbal o física de naturaleza sexual? No, senador, no lo he hecho, respondió Burgum. ¿Alguna vez se ha enfrentado a alguna medida disciplinaria o ha llegado a un acuerdo relacionado con este tipo de conducta? Preguntó entonces Hirono. No lo he hecho, dijo Burgum. Hirono, quien ha hecho preguntas iniciales similares a varios otros nominados en el pasado, incluido el candidato a secretario de Defensa Pete Hegseth y la candidata fiscal general Pam Bondi, fue ampliamente criticado por los conservadores en redes sociales debido a la línea de preguntas. Esta señora tiene problemas, publicó el comentarista conservador Chad Potter en la red X. No, esto no es IA, publicó el influencer conservador Benny Johnson en X. ¿Qué les pasa a los demócratas?, publicó en X el presidente de American Majority, Ned Ryan. Aparentemente son unos pervertidos locos por el guano del murciélago. ¿Es esto lo único en lo que piensan? ¿Cómo diablos tiene Hirono puestos en el Poder Judicial, en las Fuerzas Armadas y en la energía? Publicó la columnista Tiana Logue en X. ¿Sobre qué miembro del liderazgo demócrata tiene compromat? El comediante conservador Tim Young publicó en X que cuanto más pregunta más Hirono a los candidatos al gabinete si han agredido sexualmente a alguien, más creo que ella misma es culpable.
Speaker Mike Johnson called me a few weeks ago and said, "Hey, what's this American balance sheet idea?" I mean, I think for our standing in the world, for us to, talk nonstop about what our liabilities are, we should also be fluent, just as any business would be, to be able to talk about what our assets and the assets of this country, I think, outpace any place in the world because of the care that we've given, in particular to the public lands, the surface, the subsurface, and the offshore. And we've proven time and time again that we can do it better, cleaner, and safer than anyone else here. If I'm a timber company and I own timberland and it's not been harvested, I put that on my balance sheet. If I've got timberland and I've planted young trees, I put it on my balance sheet at a different valuation. When we protect U.S. lands and then don't cut a tree and then they burn down, we not only produce enormous amounts of emissions and enormous amounts of carbon, but we also have effectively wasted the public's asset. And I think it's part of our duty in the role, if I have the privilege of being nominated here, but all of us as elected officials, to make sure that we're getting a return on the nation's balance sheet for the benefit and the use of the American people. Right. So understanding that number, I think, is key. I would just say one last thing. People say, "Oh, it's going to be really hard. It's really hard to develop that." We did this in North Dakota. When I took office, they said, "Well, we have no way of knowing what our undeveloped minerals are," and we found a young software company that was able to figure out precisely what the future value of every one of the wells in North Dakota on public land would be worth. It's been used for estate planning. If grandma dies and she's only got 10% of one well, they can figure out the value for that. If we can do that there, we can figure it out for the whole country. And just as I said to Speaker Johnson, we're required as a nation to conduct a census within every 10 years, not every 10 years, but within 10 years, do a census. That's hard work, but we figure out a way to do it. I would think if Congress stood up and said, "Hey, every agency, every bureau, every department of the United States government needs to figure out what their asset value is," then we get after it, and we get after it, and we come up with a number, and then we can make these trade-offs. When you do by executive order and take hundreds of millions of offshore subsurface out of leasing, and then and that's viewed as a costless event, at least we could have the trade-off of say, yes, it was. Some people thought it was important to take that off the table, but what did it mean for the American people? Did we just take trillions of dollars of future revenue out of the pockets of our future generations? And so I think again, creating a financial understanding that is where we can have an honest discussion about some of these executive actions that are happening at the end of this term, for example, would be useful for all Americans to understand.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've got another question that I was going to ask regarding PILT. In the interest of time, I'm going to forego that. I'll just conclude it with a very brief statement. PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, the federal government came up with it, Congress came up with it about 50 years ago to help offset the burden states carry, states with a lot of public land, because they don't receive any property tax revenue from it, so it's supposed to offset that. In some parts of the country where there's a lot of public land, this works out okay. In other parts, it's pennies on the dollar compared to what they would get if they could tax the land even at its lowest valuation and lowest rate. So I would love to talk to you about PILT reforms and making PILT generally a priority, because a lot of these communities rely on it for fire, search and rescue, schools, safety, so forth. Senator Heinrich.
Governor, Senator Daines mentioned a very specific challenge with the Endangered Species Act, but as a governor, you know that one of the best ways to head off those conflicts is to prevent species from ever being listed by recovering them through proactive voluntary conservation at the state level. Senator Tillis and 9 of his Republican colleagues and I have a highly bipartisan bill called the Recovering America's Wildlife Act that helps states do exactly that. And in fact, North Dakota's former Game and Fish Director, Terry Steinwand, was one of the architects of that legislation. It's got strong support from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, from many of the conservation groups that you mentioned in your exchange with Senator Justice. Does that sound like the kind of approach that you could work with Senator Tillis and I on?
Absolutely, Senator Heinrich. I think that, again, super sound principle there, which is to do the work to keep it off of the any kind of federal designation, working collaboratively with the states. I had the pleasure of working with our Game and Fish Commissioner, Terry Steinwand, for 6 of my 8 years as governor. He had almost a 40-year career in wildlife management. It's people like that I know and respect across all the states. I know you've got them in New Mexico. I know we've got them in Utah. I mean, the people that work in game and fish at the state level that are working on these things. I haven't met somebody from the federal level that flies into North Dakota that cares more about the soil, the air, the water, the fish, the wildlife than the people that we have at the state level. And we should just, this sounds like you're entrusting this back to the states, and that's where it belongs.
And it was really an idea that grew out of asking all of those agencies, like, what's the right way to approach this? And they said, well, instead of, just having an emergency room, which is what the Endangered Species Act effectively is, let's try to give wildlife primary care. Let's intervene when it's much cheaper and much more effective, and you can really move the needle. You and I talked a little bit about tribal water settlements. Those are incredibly important for water certainty in the West, especially with all the conflicts we have, not just in the Colorado Basin, but also in the Rio Grande Basin and other Western basins. If you're confirmed, will you commit to continuing the department's work to both resolve legal claims around tribal water settlements, but also just implement the existing water settlements that have already been made?
Well, you've got my commitment to work on those important issues.
Great. I'm going to make one other quick statement. I know you heard from my friend and colleague from Idaho, and we've done some great work together on cleaning up abandoned mines. We don't necessarily agree on wind generation, but I would simply remind you that onshore wind is in that basket of multiple use, and so you can always hold it to the same standard as oil and gas, but you can't legally, at least, unilaterally deny legally permitted wind generation. So with that, thank you for all of your answers today.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to associate myself with your comments, Mr. Chairman, on determining the asset value of what we own. It's astounding that that doesn't exist. And one of the things that would contribute to, as we discussed previously, is adequate maintenance budgets. If you know the asset value, there are sort of standard industry percentages that should be applied in order to determine a maintenance budget. So I believe that's an important step. I presume you believe climate change is a problem. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that climate change is a global phenomenon for sure.
I noted the biographical material that in 2021 as governor, you set a goal for North Dakota of carbon neutrality by 2030 to be achieved in a variety of ways. And as you mentioned, you've really worked hard on the carbon neutrality of fossil fuel extraction and fossil fuel use. I'm a little worried today, though. You keep distinguishing between intermittent and baseload. Would you agree that renewable resources, solar and wind, for example, can be developed if they are adequately, if they can be integrated into the grid in a safe and reliable way?
Yes, they can, and it's not for me personally for any political reasons that I distinguish. It's just because of physics, the physics of the grid. If we don't have enough base load, and it's the base load that we have that's allowed our nation to make the investments into the intermittent.
I don't want the word. In a former life, I developed both base load and intermittent resources. I don't want the word base load to be code for no renewables. That's not what you're saying, is it?
No, we need a balance, but they cannot. The intermittent, if you want to call them renewables, is used as a positive word, but this is a fact of life, is they're intermittent. And when they're intermittent, until we have storage solutions, and we're years away from having significant enough cost-effective storage to support that, we need to have the base load, or the intermittent doesn't even have a life.
But it can be integrated. In your case in North Dakota, 35% of your electricity comes from wind power. I presume your grid works.
Well, it's super stressed as it is around the country. We're in parts of two grids. We're part of MISO going east, and we're part of SPP going west. And you can have days when the rated capacity is 30, but you got a day when the wind's blowing. The wind's blowing so hard it drives all the base load off of production. And then the next day it's 20 below and there's no wind blowing, and we got no wind, and then you got to crank up the base load again. And so
that's one of the most important reasons that we've talked about innovation. We need to work on storage. You would agree, I think, that renewables or intermittents, whatever you want to call them, plus storage equals baseload.
Yes, but right now at a much higher cost. And so then, of course, we want to not only have it be reliable, we also want to have it be affordable. And so that's part of what we have to look at as a nation, is what cost are we willing to take on to try to achieve those goals. And I believe in if it's all of the above, if we can decarbonize traditional fuels cheaper than we can subsidize some of the renewables, then that should be looked at fairly and equitably and economically, because that's a better path forward for every citizen if we can do it more affordably.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but we've talked a lot about innovation, and I'm a great believer in American innovation. And the cost, for example, of solar panels has gone from, $70 a kilowatt down to 70 cents. I mean, battery storage, for example, in Maine, there's a project underway for an 85 megawatt, 100-hour grid scale storage at a reasonable cost, because it's not based on lithium ion, or it's based on iron. And so if we're moving into a period where innovation, I believe, will bring storage down. And of course, as you know, wind and solar are the cheapest forms of energy today on a levelized basis, understanding that storage and backup is part of that calculation. But I hope that you'll work with the Department of Energy. Mr. Wright was here yesterday, and one of his business interests was in geothermal and batteries. So I just when I hear base load used sometimes in these contexts, it sounds like no more renewables. I don't think that's a sustainable path for this country, and it's certainly not a way of meeting the challenge of climate change, which you've acknowledged is a serious one.
No, we need all forms of electricity, and we need more of it in the very near term. And so this is not about one versus the other. This is about how do we drive forward and increase the amount of electricity we have in the country. So I'm a both, all of the above in terms of our approach on how we do it, but we got to do it in a way that's we have affordability and reliability. On the storage side, there is a future, but having been in tech for 30 years, batteries get better at about 2% a year, and that's what it's been for 30 or 40 years. And there's no breakthrough that's coming. Yes, it's improving, but it's not like the microchip, which doubles in power.
It may not be Moore's law, but I think the amount of resources that are going into this research at the Department of Energy and in other places, and the development of this iron-based grid-scale storage, there are opportunities for significant baseloads. I like your answer where you said we need it all. I appreciate having that on the record.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Governor. Appreciate you having
Thank you, Senator.
being with us.
Senator Hickenlooper.
I ran down the hall to get here. I didn't want to miss my chance for a second round of questions. And again, thank you for your service as a governor and all the way through your career. You've shown a real inclination both through your government service, but through your philanthropy to engage in the community and to go to the community. I think the letters from the tribes and what I've heard from our tribes in Colorado, that you are held in very, very high esteem, I think, across this country. And I think that's going to be a powerful thing. I have one curious question. I think they're still doing it with the Western Governors Association. Do they still meet with the Secretary of the Interior in December, or did they stop doing that?
There's been a tradition to meet with the Secretary of Interior when they have their annual meeting in Washington, D.C., which is usually in late January, early February, and I would look forward to having the opportunity for that invitation. If you know anybody there that could be, send me one.
Well, I knew that other governors are watching our discussion, so I want to make sure I got that out there.
I think your own Governor Polis may be the current chair.
This governor thing's getting kind of thick, isn't it?
Well, it's distilled down pretty much just us left. I want to talk a little bit about the Colorado River, and it's a 25-year drought, but a longer-term drought, and we're able to go back. This is the geologist in me, but there's sediments throughout the Grand Canyon that can be correlated, and this appears to be the worst drought in 10,000 years. I mean, this is a serious drought, and you've got 40 million people that depend on this, and we've been working aggressively with the lower basin states and the upper basin states. And one of the things I was, even before you began running for the highest office, the work that you did around water in North Dakota, where roughly it was the largest investments in water infrastructure ever, but half of it was for making sure you got clean water, and half of it was to make sure you were protecting against flood. I thought it was a great model for what the Department of Interior would have. And I think you have to kind of look at the Colorado River in that sense too. I think that the Bureau of Reclamation plays a significant role there, but I think a strong leader being able to find and incentivize those innovations of how do we make sure we're saving water and doing more with the water that we have rather than fighting over it. And there's a long tradition in the West of whiskeys for drinking, waters for fighting, as we said last week. Anyway, to speak a little bit about that, of how you look at of kind of working with the Colorado River, but there are a whole number of river basins that are in drought right now.
Yes, and we've got a tremendous water resource in this country. When we think about the Great Lakes, you think about the Columbia, you think about the Yukon, the Mississippi sometimes is flooding when the Colorado's in drought. We just maybe don't have it all in the right places at the right time, and where we've got population centers. And so I think, again, with smart planning, innovation, collaboration, When we've been successful in North Dakota with private-public partnerships, it's included, solutions, again, with great help from Senator Hoeven, playing a huge role on the federal. I mean, one of the projects we have there is a couple $2 billion. It's a third federal, it's a third local with a local sales tax, 100 being huge buy-in locally, and then the state stepping up and participating. So, and when we did that together, this project's going to get done in 6.5 or 7 years, as opposed to 20 or 25 or never. With something, because we have that experience in North Dakota too. We got water projects at the federal level that were started in the 1960s that still haven't fulfilled their full mission.
Right.
So anyway, I think there's an opportunity to work together to come up with solutions.
And that timeliness does magnify what can get done. The Bureau of Reclamation has done a lot of work in Colorado, I think across the West, and I think I'm universal that I haven't heard a single senator, Republican or Democrat, complain about how they've approached this. They have a bunch of projects that are midway, and I'm hopeful that I know there's going to be, there's a lot of talk about a tax cut and a lot of talk about how they're going to pay for that tax cut. Hopefully we can protect those funds that have been committed to various water projects, because the worst thing you can have, and this has happened to Colorado 2 or 3 times over the past several decades, where you get halfway out, you're building something, and then all of a sudden the support goes away.
Yeah, agree. Having a secure and predictable forms of capital for these projects. When you have the instability, the uncertainty, then the people that are bidding on the projects bid higher. They have to take out more risk on their side. Their insurance companies that are supporting them on the private side say, don't do this. When we were able to go to the private-public partnership and we could create certainty that they would have the permits, that lowered the cost dramatically, and not only the time to get it done, but it also lowered the cost.
That's music to my ears, and we agree completely. So we'll remember this conversation 3 years from now, and I'm sure who knows what the future will bring. But I appreciate that commitment to the long-term solutions. I think that is necessary on almost every level in this country.
Great, thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One quick item for the record. As you know, I've passed legislation to keep horses in the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. I'm a horse fan. You and your wife are horse fans. I just want to know that you'll commit to the record to continue to work on that very important issue with me.
Absolutely. For the record, people should know that as popular as Senator Hoeven is in our state, the horses in the national park have even more followers on social media than he does.
Yeah, no question. And then just one final item. I think you've demonstrated to both sides of the aisle your absolute willingness to work with everybody to achieve good outcomes and a good outcome for this country. And that's exactly what we want in somebody that goes into these important positions. And so thank you to Catherine. And then just if there's anything for the record that you want to add to the record, I would just give you this opportunity before turning things back to the chairman. And again, I want to thank both the chairman and the ranking member as well.
Well, the only thing I would do quickly is close with gratitude to Chairman Lee and Ranking Member Heinrich. Thank you for your time ahead of time. Thank you for making your members available to me for meetings ahead of time. And thanks for this great dialogue and discussion today. I've received a lot of invitations from members to come and visit. I would be remiss if I didn't, before I leave, to extend an invitation on behalf of Senator Hoeven, Senator Kramer, and myself to come to the grand opening of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum, which is currently scheduled for July 4th, 2026. It's an official USA 250 event. And of course, it's going to have an opportunity to tell the story of leadership and citizenship and conservation that really began during the time when Theodore Roosevelt spent time in North Dakota. His wife and his mother tragically died on the same day in the same house, on Valentine's Day of 1884, and he had a newborn infant daughter that was 2 days old. He handed that off to his sister, and he got on the train, and he was deeply despondent, and went west and remade himself from he'd had a childhood of that was full of sickness, and he went from a sickly Easterner and became a rough and tumble Westerner, a cowboy, learned the hard way out there with a lot of time in the saddle, and built the Elkhorn Ranch. And from then he developed his thoughts about conservation in this country. And we know the story that went from there. That led him to become the Rough Rider that he was, that propelled him into becoming a governor, formed the National Governors Association, saved football. I mean, now the largest viewed sport. And the NCAA was formed because Theodore Roosevelt was listening to concerns from mothers whose too many of their sons were dying of head injuries playing football in the Ivy League schools without protections. And so he said, let's come up with some standard safety protections. So there's many stories about TR that haven't been told like that, but the only president to receive a Medal of Honor for his time in the military. One of his sons also received a Medal of Honor, who was there at Normandy in World War II. But incredible story, and of course Nobel Peace Prize that he received for negotiating the settlement between Russia and Japan. And he wrote more books than all the other presidents combined. He wrote more letters than Jefferson and Washington. We're in the process of digitizing all of that. This will be the first digital presidential library. It'll be one of the most sustainable buildings built in North America. And it's in the heart of the Badlands that he loved, at a gateway community that goes into the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And in closing, I would say someone asked this 4th of July, are you going to have fireworks? Per tradition, when you open a presidential library, all living presidents are invited. So we may, if they all show up, we may not need to have additional fireworks. But it'll be a great, because there's a lot of what we know about Theodore Roosevelt that still lives on today. And think about the discussions we're having. The Panama Canal wouldn't have happened without him, and how important that was for our country during World War II, and how important it is for our future going forward. So, in water, of course, in Arizona, he was some of the original water systems in Arizona were dedicated and created by Theodore Roosevelt. One of the first wildlife refuges that he made in the country was in North Dakota at Stump Lake. He sent us on a way to build out the national park system as we know it right now. So it's with a bit of serendipity and a great amount of excitement that as Secretary of Interior, I'll look forward to being at that opening along with all of you. This committee's all officially invited as of right now. It would be great to have you all there. And with that, again, thank you, senators, and especially thank you, Senator Hoeven and Kramer, for your folks, your support, your friendship, and your mentorship for all these years.
Thank you, Governor. It's been a great hearing, and I appreciate the participation of all the members, staff, members of the committee, and especially our Capitol Police Force keeping us safe today. I'm sure that given all the time he spent in North Dakota, Theodore Roosevelt learned correctly to pronounce the name of the animal that is called the bison.
It is. It does have a Z. I agree with.
It's got a Z.
B-I-Z.
It's a Z that, well, it's not a silent Z. It's just an invisible one. With all that,
Mr. Chairman, do you know what the Lady Buffalo said to her little boy as he was going off to school?
Oh no, I don't. What did he say?
Bye, son.
That's it.
I would also mention that Teddy Roosevelt coined.
I love it. I just love it.
Going to open up a whole new debate.
He coined the term malefactors of great wealth. I'll just leave it at that.
Hoeven's going to be telling that one for weeks. The record will stand open until 6 p.m. today for questions.
Muy pronto, vuelve a escuchar las noticias más relevantes en este canal de noticias.